Here's the materials that I'll be using for this project. I have my hatchet. I'll be using that to make my pattern. This is the pattern that I'll be using, and I'll show in a little bit how I made the pattern. It's just grocery bag, made with a grocery bag. Leather needles. Now these are not Glover's needles. Glover's needles are designed to actually sew with leather. These are not pointy on the end, and they're just used for threading or lacing. So we'll be actually punching holes in the leather before we start sewing, so we won't need a Glover's needle. If you want to dye the material, I'm using leather cording instead of thread, which is why I'm using these needles instead of a Glover's needle. Pliers, I like these because they have the needle nose tip and they have this flat crimping edge, which I use quite a bit for gripping the needles. X-Acto knife, you really just need one for cutting the thicker pieces of leather. I did start off using a hole punch. You can try that if you want to. It didn't work well for me, and maybe this just isn't a very good quality, but I found it was just tearing holes in the leather instead of actually punching the holes that I was looking for. This is a snap set. It will put in snaps, and it comes with the setter and everything. I like using gem tack. It's an adhesive, and it's designed for attaching gems to fabric or clothing or that sort of thing. But I found that it works really well with attaching the leather. If you glue your material before you start punching and stitching, the project's going to go a lot easier. And I've got two different kinds of leather. This is a thick tooling leather. I don't know exactly the weight of it, but it's pretty thick. And we'll be using this to protect the lacing from the blade of the hatchet. Let's see, I also have a leather punch. It's just a real small awl. And then one that's also a bit bigger. And a piece of scrap wood to use with the awl so that you don't, punch holes in your floor, that sort of thing. And then the larger piece of leather that we'll actually be making this sheath from. This is kind of thin. It's going to work fine for this project for me. You may want to choose something a little bit thicker depending on what you want your finished project to look like. This is a tooling leather that I got at a fabric store. If you're going to be buying materials or equipment or anything at a hobby store like Michael's or Hobby Lobby, look online. They almost always have a 40% off coupon that if you're buying something that's a little bit more pricey, like a roll of leather, it can really save you a few dollars. Okay, for the quill work for this project, for the emblem that I want to have on the sheath, I drew out the design that I wanted and reduced it to the appropriate size so that would fit where I want it to when the sheath is finished. And I think that will do just fine. Okay, so we are back to the hatchet sheath. For those of you that have seen my video on quilling, I had an unfortunate incident with the birch bark. It cracked when I was just at the end of my project. So I've done a little bit of research and trying to figure out how to prevent that from happening again. So while I'm waiting for the new batch of birch bark to hopefully flatten out and my quills to soften, I thought I'd get back to the bigger project, which is the sheath. With the pattern, this is, I just traced the axe onto grocery bag and then flipped it over, left about a ½ inch space, flipped it over, traced the other side. These tabs will go underneath, will come underneath here to support the actual weight of the axe. I'm going to change the pattern a little bit because I want a flap to come over the top, and there's going to be a snap to hold it, which is what the quill project was for, was to decorative and also to hide the snap. So when I alter the pattern, I'm going to have it come across up like this and then back down so that that piece of leather will flip over the top. and create a cover for it. I did a little kind of what I call a quick and dirty earlier with just some scrap leather that I had to make sure that it would actually fit and to know how far up here to sew, because the handle of the axe is wider than this top part. You need to make sure that when you're sliding it through that there's enough room for this wider part of the axe to actually come through for the handle, and it does work that way. So this is my kind of little quick and dirty just to see if everything was going to work. So I'll start working on this project again while I'm waiting for my birch bark to flatten and my quills to soften up. Okay, so I redid my pattern for the sheath. I used the original pattern that I had for my little quick and dirty. Put the axe on there, lined it up, and then I want this flap to be one piece and to come over. So I did just made my pattern a little bit bigger so that it folds over like this. Now it doesn't cover all the way because this piece is going to come across and this will be sewn, and then this is just going to be a flap that will cover the top, and there's going to be a little snap right there. This top part is not exactly a mirror image of the bottom. It's a little bit wider up here because the axe is wider where the handle meets than it is at the blade. So I needed to accommodate for that so that when I flip it over, there's extra material here to cover that width and the edges still meet. So I will cut out my leather and start putting it together. Okay, so I have my pattern cut out of the leather. So if I match it up here, like that, this folds over and meets the edge like it's supposed to, and then this piece will fold down like that. So that all looks good. The next thing I'll do is there needs to be a thicker piece of leather right here to protect the laces from the blade. Otherwise, every time you put the axe into the sheath, you're going to cut the laces. So I have this thicker leather here. So I'm going to cut out just a small strip, about 1/4 inch, that's going to go right here to protect the laces from the blade.